There are many arguments for and against algorithmic generation tools, like ChatGPT, DALL-E, and Midjourney, commonly referred to as AI, even though I hate that name. A few weeks ago, I criticized several of the arguments that seemed to me to be aimed at stopping these platforms from doing what they do. I think the people who are making these arguments are trying to convince the platform designers to consider the impact of their technology and to treat creatives' work more fairly. I don't think the arguments are very strong, but that does not make me an AI fanboy or supporter. I do not wish pain and suffering upon creatives, but I don't think this tack will be successful. After all, I am a creative, and I canceled my Midjourney account at the beginning of the year. I think this technology is inevitable, and I think there's ample evidence that some companies are already feeding the entire internet into their algorithms databases while training datasets are a legislative gray area. So, is there a better line of argumentation, or should we stop teaching the arts?
Art is dead. Art is dead.
Is there any reason to learn how to draw or paint or write when within the next few years the algorithm will beat you at it? I don't think we should stop teaching art, and I think everyone would benefit from learning how to make art to some degree. To further my point, I'm going to focus on drawing. Everything I'm saying is by no means the fullest limit of drawing. Rather, I'm speaking in broad, generic terms of what drawing is in a very simplified manner. Let's try something for a moment. Imagine an apple in your mind. Does it look something like this? What color is it? Probably red, though sometimes I have folks say green. How long is the stem? How many leaves does it have? Look at this apple. Look at this drawing of an apple. Neither of these things look like those emoji apples. What exactly is happening when you imagine something like an apple? You're accessing a very low resolution image of the category of apple, not remembering a specific apple, unless you have a very specific and powerful memory of an apple. There are all sorts of reasons for this, but in short, you need to store very broad categories of things in your mind. So what happens when you learn to draw? You begin to ignore the categories in your mind. You begin to learn how to look at what is in front of you. The art of observational drawing is to learn how to ignore your categorizing and discriminating mind in order to observe what is actually sitting in front of you. That does not seem very imaginative. In fact, that seems almost robotic. Why not just let the algorithm do the boring translation of the world for you? After all, the camera has already been doing that for a century and a half, give or take. Isn't the ultimate promise of every technological innovation a freedom from some degree of labor? Let's step back to the apple. Now that you've looked at an apple a little more closely, when I take the image away, can you still see the apple in some manner in your mind? Was it all one color? Or was it at least two colors? Was it shiny? Where was the light coming from? Did it look good to eat, or was it starting to rot? As you can see, even just a few minutes of looking at a real thing can expand your imagination insofar as an image on your screen is real. I bet for as long as you remember this video, you will have a little bit higher resolution image come to mind when and if someone asks you to imagine an apple. Creatives are doing something a bit odd and counterintuitive. They are learning to see by looking at things they largely already know. In fact, there is a great book about this by John Berger called Ways of Seeing. Another book that is really helpful to understand the value of learning to be creative is by Ken Steinbach called Creative Practices for Visual Artists. Learning the skills of the arts, like drawing, expands our maps of the world. The more apples you look at, the more you will see how apples can be meaningful or useful or another potential that has yet to be discovered. The more you explore something, the more questions will rise up to confront you, especially if you start broadening your skill set to include the culinary arts through tasting them or mashing them and fermenting them. You'll start to notice significantly more details surrounding the apple than if you never looked at one. What artists are learning to do through our strange practices is to notice new potentials in things, whether these things are actual materials, specific techniques, or even invisible ideas we play with in our minds. We have to look at an apple for a short time to realize you could throw one to bean your friend across the room. But how long would you have to look at one to wonder if it is the fruit that caused the fall, or to notice that it cleans your teeth as you eat it? You see, the primary skill of an artist is not making a work of art. It is making something with what they've got. The primary characteristic that sets an artist apart from others is that they continually question whether they really know what a thing is, and they push the limits of the things they've got. How many apples do you need to draw before you really know an apple? What can you do with an apple? What can an apple mean? By looking at things and learning to set aside our assumptions, we're able to discover new potentials. Will new potentials of an apple be discovered anytime soon? I don't know. I certainly have not seen much new potential in an apple in my creative practice. But Steve Jobs did. He saw a lot about what an apple could be somehow. I do wonder why it has a bite taken out of it. It reminds me of an old story. But what is the use of such a difficult and time-consuming task when algorithms will make every image we could ever want or need? Think back to the simple emoji apple earlier. The algorithm is doing something very similar to our imagination in our mind's eye. Each step of its image generation is pulling more and more detail out of background noise until it achieves an image that is recognizable to us as an apple. But that's not showing us the particularities of an apple. It is literally creating the general image of an apple. It is generating that which only seems like an apple. It does not find new meaning or new details like a human does. It's not looking at a particular manifestation of an apple in the real world. Rather, it is generating images of an apple from its already defined pattern of what an apple should be. Maybe one day it will be able to curiously explore actual physical objects. Then I would be willing to call it an artificial intelligence. But if you want to learn how to explore your environment, how to discover new potential, and how to iterate on previous solutions to find something new, then you should at least learn to draw. Perhaps the point of drawing shouldn't be the end product, but what you learn from the practice. After all, we live in a society that is changing at an insane pace. Things rise and fall. I think Tom Scott's take on the period of change that we are going into is apt. His video is linked below. All the things we recognize will be destabilized by so-called AI. This is not a doom and gloom message, but rather an acknowledgement of the need to be flexible. A good creative practice continues not because of the production of an end goal. The process is a form of end in and of itself. In the text I mentioned before, Ken Steinbach surveys 75 creatives who've had at least 10 years of success in a creative field, from artists, graphic designers, videographers, fashion designers, and more. He compiles the common elements of what has enabled them to succeed in such unique and ever-changing fields. I won't go into all the detail. You should grab the book for that. It's an especially good read if you are in the habit of teaching the arts to anyone. At the core, there are 3 broad categories that encapsulate a creative practice. The creative sets aside time and space to be creative. That's why you need to take a class or do something intentional to begin to grow creatively. Steinbach's 3rd large category is the process itself. The creative is constantly expanding their horizon. They are reading, trying new techniques, exploring. Part of that process is the pleasure of working with and mastering materials and forms, and the discovery of visual ideas that the artist has never seen. The creative must know that they do not know everything. They must humbly pursue new understandings. They can't settle for the emoji apple in their mind's eye. In this way, a good creative practice distinguishes itself from creative problem solving. Steinbach continues, in contrast to such a problem-solving mentality, an artistic practice generates works and ideas organically through an interactive and sustained process. Where the focus of problem-solving is on specific and conclusive solutions, the focus of an artist practice is larger and more expansive, and includes far more speculative work and research not immediately applied to the making of the project at hand. Creating and maintaining a practice is, to a large degree, about establishing a new way of thinking and working, and then feeding that process. Days and weeks are spent investigating visual ideas, experimenting with materials, and reading about their subject. Time is spent dwelling with the work and ideas in the studio in order to understand it in very deep ways. It's not unusual to hear artists describe their process as their real art, the production of the physical art object/experience as a byproduct. Many artists see their practice not as a process designed to produce art, but as a way of engaging the world and exploring visual ideas, out of which artwork often emerges. The artwork is a result of their practice, but it is not necessarily always the goal. This mode of living is quite radical. I can say from personal experience, it is life-changing. It has helped me reinvent myself professionally over and over. It has helped me make art. I believe all people need to relearn how to be creative, especially if the very fabric of our society is beginning to fray. We need to look both backwards and forwards, and under every stone, like artists do, like a curious child does. Which brings me to one note about the education system. I'm not a huge fan of the Western lecture-based teaching model. I think it's pretty poor, but I don't think our education system is necessarily teaching creativity out of us. Life does that. The education system might be speeding that process up, and it certainly isn't helping stop it, but it is inevitable. You need to view the world in simple categories in order to get things done in a timely manner. The child has no need to rush. Adults need to rush to get almost everything done. Your simple image of an apple in your mind is not because you're dumb. It's because that's all you really need an apple to be in your mind in order for you to recognize and understand the use of an apple. It's highly effective, but it's not very imaginative. Being creative, imagining things, and investigating the world around you is very childlike. I believe the creative practice is a way to learn how to play again, how to view the world as if for the first time. You need to train yourself to explore once you're an adult. You have to intentionally look at the areas where you are blinded by ignorance or pride. You need to sit down and try to draw an apple in a realistic manner. When was the last time you really looked at an apple? It might be that your whole reasonable world is not exactly as it seems. Your reason has gotten you so far, but might need some imagination in the future, especially a future that seems extremely uncertain at the moment. Learning to be creative will help you grow your imaginative capacities, and if you work hard and are a little bit lucky, you might actually make something that people want to look at. This isn't an argument against these AI platforms. Rather, it's an argument for the arts. On that video I made, a commenter who goes by Marion87 said this in part: "I've used AI to create around 10,000 images in the last year. I've tested and experimented with the prompts and settings and styles, etc. What have I lost? Absolutely nothing. But I've gained a new way of being creative. Have I created some masterpieces? Maybe, but most likely not. But it was fun." But then later down in the comment, Marion87 says, "I'd be lying if I didn't also feel some slight feeling of loss or sadness." I'm not able to predict what will happen with this technology in the future, but I can say this: I don't think I've made 10,000 images yet. I remember tons of the work I have made. I remember what I was thinking about and wrestling with. I remember how it affected me and how I've grown because I've wrestled with certain images and forms and materials and styles and ideas. I remember the conclusions I came to, and I remember how I grew from that process. It doesn't sound to me like Marion87 and I had the same experience as we've been creating. This is the reason I canceled my Midjourney account. I'm sure for some it will become a part of their creative practice, but I don't think it will help teach people to be more creative. I think it will fool people into thinking they understand the world more than they really do. I think it will show them what they expect to see, and it'll be more difficult as it gets better and better to find something surprising.